Chapter 2 of Book 2 of Les Misérables, Volume 4, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by May Lowe. Les Misérables, Volume 4, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. Book 2, Éponine. Chapter 2. Embryonic formation of crimes in the incubation of prisons. Javert's triumph in the Gorbeau hovel seemed complete, but had not been so. In the first place, and this constituted the principal anxiety, Javert had not taken the prisoner. The assassinated man who flees is more suspicious than the assassin, and it is probable that this personage, who had been so precious a capture for the ruffians, would be no less fine a prize for the authorities. And then, Montparnasse had escaped Javert. Another opportunity of laying hands on that devil's dandy must be waited for. Montparnasse had, in fact, encountered Éponine as she stood on the watch under the trees of the boulevard, and had led her off, preferring to play Nemorin with the daughter rather than Schinderhannes with the father. It was well that he did so. He was free. As for Éponine, Javert had caused her to be seized, a mediocre consolation. Éponine had joined Azelma at Les Madelonettes. And finally, on the way from the Gorbeau house to La Force, one of the principal prisoners, Claquesous, had been lost. It was not known how this had been effected. The police agents and the sergeants could not understand it at all. He had converted himself into vapour. He had slipped through the handcuffs. He had trickled through the crevices of the carriage. The fiacre was cracked, and he had fled. All that they were able to say was, that on arriving at the prison, there was no Claquesous. Either the fairies or the police had had a hand in it. Had Claquesous melted into the shadows like a snowflake in water? Had there been unavowed connivance of the police agents? Did this man belong to the double enigma of order and disorder? Was he concentric with infraction and repression? Had this sphinx his forepaws in crime and his hindpaws in authority? Javert did not accept such combinations, and would have bristled up against such compromises. But his squad included other inspectors besides himself, who were more initiated than he, perhaps, although they were his subordinates in the secrets of the prefecture, and Claquesous had been such a villain that he might make a very good agent. It is an excellent thing for ruffianism and an admirable thing for the police to be on such intimate juggling terms with the night. These double-edged rascals do exist. However that may be, Claquesous had gone astray and was not found again. Javert appeared to be more irritated than amazed at this. As for Marius, that booby of a lawyer, who had probably become frightened and whose name Javert had forgotten, Javert attached very little importance to him. Moreover, a lawyer can be hunted up at any time. But was he a lawyer after all? The investigation had begun. The magistrate had thought it advisable not to put one of these men of the band of Patron Minette in close confinement, in the hope that he would chatter. This man was Brujon, the long-haired man of the Rue du Petit Banquier. He had been let loose in the Charlemagne courtyard, and the eyes of the watchers were fixed on him. This name of Brujon is one of the souvenirs of La Force. In that hideous courtyard, called the court of the Bâtiment Neuf, new building, which the administration called the Court Saint Bernard, and which the robbers called the Fossé Lion, the Lion's Ditch, on that wall covered with scales and leprosy, which rose to the left to a level with the roofs, near an old door of rusty iron, which led to the ancient chapel of the ducal residence of La Force, then turned in a dormitory for ruffians, there could still be seen, 12 years ago, a sort of fortress roughly carved in the stone with a nail, and beneath it this signature, Brujon, 1811. The Brujon of 1811 was the father of the Brujon of 1832. The latter, of whom the reader caught but a glimpse at the Gorbeau house, was a very cunning and very adroit young spark, with a bewildered and plaintive air. It was in consequence of this plaintive air that the magistrate had released him, thinking him more useful in the Charlemagne yard than in close confinement. Robbers do not interrupt their profession because they are in the hands of justice. They do not let themselves be put out by such a trifle as that. To be in prison for one crime is no reason for not beginning on another crime. They are artists, who have one picture in the salon, and who toil, none the less, on a new work in their studios. Brujon seemed to be stupefied by prison. He could sometimes be seen standing by the hour together in front of the sutler's window in the Charlemagne yard, staring like an idiot at the sordid list of prices which began with garlic, 62 centimes, and ended with cigar, 5 centimes. Or he passed his time in trembling, chattering his teeth, saying that he had a fever, and inquiring whether one of the 28 beds in the fever ward was vacant. All at once, towards the end of February 1832, it was discovered that Brujon, that somnolent fellow, had had 3 different commissions executed by the errand men of the establishment, not under his own name, but in the name of 3 of his comrades, and they had cost him in all 50 sous, an exorbitant outlay which attracted the attention of the prison corporal. Inquiries were instituted, and on consulting the tariff of commissions posted in the convicts' parlour, it was learned that the 50 sous could be analysed as follows: 3 commissions, 1 to the Pantheon, 10 sous, 1 to Val de Grace, 15 sous, and 1 to the Barrière des Grenelles, 25 sous. This last was the dearest of the whole tariff. Now at the Pantheon, at the Val de Grace, and at the Barrière des Grenelles were situated the domiciles of the 3 very redoubtable prowlers of the barriers, Kruideniers, alias Bizarre, Glorieux, an ex-convict, and Barre Caros, upon whom the attention of the police was directed by this incident. It was thought that these men were members of Patron Minette. 2 of those leaders, Babet and Guelmer, had been captured. It was supposed that the messages, which had been addressed, not to houses, but to people who were waiting for them in the street, must have contained information with regard to some crime that had been plotted. They were in possession of other indications. They laid hand on the 3 prowlers, and supposed that they had circumvented some one or other of Brujon's machinations. About a week after these measures had been taken, one night, as the superintendent of the watch, who had been inspecting the lower dormitory in the Bâtiment Neuf, was about to drop his chestnut in the box, this was the means adopted to make sure that the watchmen performed their duties punctually. Every hour, a chestnut must be dropped into all the boxes nailed to the doors of the dormitories. A watchman looked through the peephole of the dormitory, and beheld Brujon sitting on his bed and writing something by the light of the hall lamp. The guardian entered. Brujon was put in a solitary cell for a month, but they were not able to seize what he had written. The police learned nothing further about it. What is certain is that on the following morning, a postilion was flung from the Charlemagne yard into the Lion's Ditch, over the 5-story building which separated the 2 courtyards. What prisoners call a postilion is a pallet of bread artistically moulded, which is sent into Ireland, that is to say, over the roofs of a prison, from one courtyard to another. Etymology, over England, from one land to another, into Ireland. This little pellet falls in the yard. The man who picks it up opens it and finds in it a note addressed to some prisoner in that yard. If it is a prisoner who finds the treasure, he forwards the note to its destination. If it is a keeper, or one of the prisoners secretly sold, who are called sheep in prisons and foxes in the galleys, the note is taken to the office and handed over to the police. On this occasion, The postilion reached its address, although the person to whom it was addressed was, at that moment, in solitary confinement. This person was no other than Babet, one of the four heads of Patron Minette. The postilion contained a roll of paper on which only these two lines were written: Babet, there is an affair in the Rue Plumet, a gate on a garden. This is what Brujon had written the night before. In spite of male and female searchers, Babet managed to pass the note on from La Force to the Salpêtrière, to a good friend whom he had, and who was shut up there. This woman, in turn, transmitted the note to another woman of her acquaintance, a certain Magnon, who was strongly suspected by the police, though not yet arrested. This Magnon, whose name the reader has already seen, had relations with the Thénardiers, which will be described in detail later on, and she could, by going to see Éponine, serve as a bridge between the Salpêtrière and les Madelonettes. It happened, at precisely that moment, as proofs were wanting in the investigation directed against Thénardier in the matter of his daughters, Éponine and Azelma were released. When Éponine came out, Magnon, who was watching the gate of the Madelonettes, handed her Brujon's note to Babet, charging her to look into the matter. Éponine went to the Rue Plumet, recognized the gate and the garden, observed the house, spied, lurked, and, a few days later, brought to Magnon, who delivers in the Rue Cloche-Perce, a biscuit, which Magnon transmitted to Babet's mistress in the Salpêtrière. A biscuit, in the shady symbolism of prisons, signifies nothing to be done. So that in less than a week from that time, as Brujon and Babet met in the circle of La Force, the one on his way to the examination, the other on his way from it. "Well," asked Brujon, "the Rue P?" "Biscuit," replied Babet. Thus did the fetus of crime, engendered by Brujon in La Force, miscarry. This miscarriage had its consequences, however, which were perfectly distinct from Brujon's programme. The reader will see what they were. Often when we think we are knotting one thread, we are tying quite another. End of Book 2, Chapter 2.